Howdy, folks. I'm Alyssa Naley. I'm a master's degree student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and this is part 2 of All Booked, a video series about reading I'm working on for the Georgetown Public Library. In this episode, we'll join the second half of my discussion with my friend Stephanie Horsley, where we discussed comfort reads. Let's get going. So now I would like to switch gears, if we can. Because we have talked about this a bit in the past about comfort reads. So when you think of comfort reads, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, to me, a comfort read is usually revisiting old friends.
So,
Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
A lot of my work is thinking about things, and sometimes when I want a comfort read, I don't necessarily want the suspense of a new book. I want to visit people that I know, that I love, that I know the read is going to be super satisfying. And so that could be something like, for example, this is a book, The Birth of the Firebringer by, what's her name? Meredith Ann Pierce. This is a book that I bought in grade 4, and I am a long ways off of grade 4, like decades and decades. But I would say this was probably the first book that I was obsessed with as a child. So it's about a unicorn, and there's and the unicorns are like warriors, and there's griffins, and they're not your typical fluffy unicorns. They're tough, these unicorns, and they have a battle with another species. And it was the first book I was really kind of obsessed with as a child, and I reread this book like fairly often because it brings me joy. Like, it brings me the joy of a child like rediscovering a whole world of fantasy. It was probably the first fantasy book I ever read too, which I went on to love, and it actually holds up over time. Like, as an adult with an English background, when I read this book, I'm like, this is a well-written book.
I have other books by Meredith Ann Pierce, and I love to read them, and they do hold up as an adult. I get probably different things out of them as an adult than I did as a child, when I was in middle school or as a teenager. But I still really like to read them.
Yeah,
they're really great. And you're right about reliving that initial love of reading, just pure joy of reading.
And sometimes the comfort read for me is also books that remind me of kind of a special time or a certain period in life. So, for example, I have this book. This is A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It's a monster. It's huge pages. And this is one of the first books I read after I graduated from university, and I was like serious literature, seriously into literature. And I had taken a Commonwealth fiction class, which I don't think we would call it Commonwealth fiction anymore. We'd probably call it colonial fiction. And we did a unit on India and Indian independence. And so I was really into like Salman Rushdie at the time, and lots of different books around independence in India and all the challenges that went through that. And I picked up this book. As you can see, it's well worn. It's like falling apart. And I read it all through like the summer after I graduated. It took me the whole summer to get through it. And so I have all these memories of, first of all, getting to love these characters, because in a book this long, you really get to love the characters. Oh, you have to love them or you can't stick with it. And I remember when I finished this book feeling sad that I wasn't going to know what happened in the rest of their life, and like wishing that I could like write them a letter or like call them up, or it was too early to Google people then, but like somehow know what had happened with them. But I also have remembered like remembrances of like all the things I did that summer and all the places I was when I read this, because I traveled around and I took this book with me everywhere. And so it reminds me of that time as well.
Yeah, one doesn't often think about how when you're very fond of a book, that actually sometimes that affection actually is connected in some way to a memory of the reading experience in and of itself. Maybe other things that have actually nothing to do with the book itself, but other things that you were doing at the time, or maybe if it was a gift from somebody, and that's what brings you joy or adds to your joy of the book.
Yeah, there might have been something happening in your life at that time, and the book, for whatever reason, really resonated with you, like the characters or the plot somehow resonated with you at that point of time, and so it holds a special place in your heart.
Yeah, I think, and that's the lovely thing about, I guess, the flexibility of books, about what a comfort read means to you might means something different for me. Because I think different people want different things out of their reading, like for fun. Mm-hmm. And particularly when you're looking for a book to read, do you ever think about what mood you're in? Will that affect your reading choice?
Oh, definitely.
When it comes to comfort reads, like if you're wanting like a happy cry or you want like a warm fuzzy feeling.
Yeah,
Has that ever happened?
No, that's true. And there are times, when I want a comfort read, I'm not going to dive into a book that like deals with historical injustices and physical abuse and toxic masculinity, which are like, those are all books that I would read like on a normal reading day. But when you're feeling like cognitive overload, I personally don't feel like diving into those books. I think that's where I know I want to go to a book where I kind of know the outcome a little bit and I know where we're heading. I think maybe the one exception of that, and I just got this today, so I have to show it. Super excited. I'm sure people all over the country got this today. But this is the next book in the Outlander series, which is also
Outlander.
And it just came out today. I pre-ordered it. So I think this is an example of a comfort read where I have no idea what's going to happen, but I've been living with these characters for 20 years. And so like, I'm feeling like this is going to be pure joy reading it. In fact, I'm going on vacation in a little while and I'm trying to hold off like reading it until I go away. But it's really heavy, so I'm not sure if I want to carry it around with me.
Yeah, particularly when you're staying up late past your bedtime, you're like, oh, this book is really heavy, but I can't put it down, but it's heavy and my hand is going numb. What do I do? Does that ever happen to you?
I switched to e-readers a little while ago for that exact reason. But I have this, I'm a bit of a completionist, so I have like all the books in physical form. And so I wanted this one in physical form too.
Yeah. How many books are in the Outlander series now?
I want to say this is book 9. I'm looking this way because they're all up on my shelf there. I believe this is book 9. There are spin-off books as well, but this is the main series.
And now for those who have never read that series, is it alternate history? Is it what genre is it?
It's real history. So Jacobite Rebellion and the American Revolution. So it takes place in Scotland and in the United States. And the premise is that the main character, Claire, is a accidental time traveler. And she was a very strong, well-educated woman. She becomes a doctor later on in the series. And then part of it is grappling with what that means to be the amazing, strong woman that she is, traveling back in time when those characteristics may not have been appreciated by those around her.
So she repeatedly travels back in time, or is it just the once?
More than once.
Okay.
I don't want to give away too many spoilers. Although you can watch it now on Stars.
Yes. Yes, I've heard of the series, but I heard of the book series first, but I didn't know what the time period was. I just knew it a little bit of the time travel element, but I didn't know the whole premise. So I was kind of curious what your take on it was. That does sound like a unique, a lot of things going on in one series and how that could evolve over several books. Do you typically read series for comfort reads, or do you go for more standalone?
Yeah, no, I think I do. I was thinking about this, and most of the books that I like for comfort read are longer reads. And that probably gets back to my liking to get to know people. So the Birth of the Firebringer, that's a trilogy. A Suitable Boy is just a very long book. I'm currently re-listening to the Wheel of Time series on audiobook. And that is like 14 or 15 books. I love Lord of the Rings. Actually, one of my comfort reads I was going to say is The Silmarillion. People don't talk a lot about The Silmarillion, but it lays the groundwork for the entire Lord of the Rings universe. And I know that it was, it says J.R.R. Tolkien, heavily edited by his son, and it's somewhat controversial in terms of people saying, you know, is that really what Tolkien intended? But I love it. And actually, this is another interesting example of a book that I never really thought I would love, because it's more like a series of short stories, and I don't usually love short stories, but they're all tales that are interwoven together, and they make this huge grand mythology that I think when you go back to the Lord of the Rings really deepens the impact of that story.
That's interesting that you mentioned that sometimes you're not a huge fan of short stories, because I think sometimes people want, for like comfort reads, they want to maybe replicate the childhood bedtime story experience. And sometimes they actually go for short stories like LeVar Burton Reads. Have you listened to that podcast?
No, I'm familiar with it, but I feel like it's something I should listen to, because LeVar Burton, who doesn't love him? Yeah,
LeVar Burton. And it's, you know, for those of us who grew up with reading Rainbow, he is now doing that for adults with short stories. And he talks about it at the end, which I think it's LeVar Burton. So of course it's delightful. But he actually talks about short stories, which are often an overlooked genre of fiction. And for really, when done really well, they can be done. They're very beautiful. And also, when we think of short stories, they're not necessarily, you know, 5 pages. They can actually vary in length. But you can get to know these characters. It's just not quite as in depth as, say, in A Suitable Boy, where you have 1,400 pages to get to know.
Yeah, you get to know these guys over months.
But I guess for every reader, there's something, like there's a book or an audiobook or something that could appeal to them, and I think that varies, right?
Yeah. And I should say I'm showing you physical books here because it's the easiest thing to show you, but I do think a comfort read can be in any format. So, you know, I have books that I've looked for from my childhood that I put on my e-reader or my audiobook, like Watership Down. I listened to that one on audiobook and of course wept like a baby during it. It was beautifully read. I'm not sure who the reader was, but yeah, that was almost like listening to childhood stories.
That's actually really interesting, because I remember when I was looking up, you know, what are the common book recommendations for comfort reads? One of the ones that kept popping up was The Little Prince.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah.
I had to read that in French in high school. And I only say that because for me, a comfort read is not something that has something that happens that is quite sad in it.
And that surprised me. But I think for some people, it's something it's familiar, but it's more of a happy sad or a cathartic kind of more of emotion. So I think that's maybe where it's coming from. They've also mentioned like The Giving Tree, and I was like, oh, that's right.
Oh, childhood. I own that book. It's over on my shelf, but I personally would not pick it up for comfort, even though it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I think of comfort, I think of, it depends. Like one comfort book that I think can be sad, but it's still very beautiful, would be The Last Unicorn.
Yes.
Because like when you really sit and think about some of these passages in this book, they can be very heavy, but also it's still just a beautiful book, and there's so many memories associated with it. And it's also just a lovely story as well. Peter S. Beagle is a very talented writer. But it also depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm not in that mood. if I'm still wanting fantasy, Howl's Moving Castle. Have you ever read that?
I have not, no.
It takes concept, like tropes of fantasy and fairy tales, and delightfully plays with them. And it's very tongue in cheek. And have you ever seen the animated movie?
No, I haven't. No.
It was directed by Hayao Miyazaki, the Japanese animation master, and beautiful movie, gorgeous movie. But also, it helps to read the book before you watch the movie. I think both of them are two different animals, and they're both equally delightful and beautiful. But you get a little bit more context that you're not going to get from the movie. And there are a couple of changes that the movie does that doesn't happen in the book. That's, can streamline the plot, or, for a variety of reasons they chose to do it that way. But I think they have the same beautiful story and highly engaging and often very, very funny characters. I don't want to give it away, but highly entertaining characters and some very relatable and likable characters. And sometimes they're likable, even though you wouldn't necessarily, they're not necessarily human, but they're likable. And I think Diana Wynne Jones is a very talented writer, and she does fantasy very well. And she clearly has a great respect and love for that genre, but she's also not afraid to play with it as well. So,
I feel that way. As you were talking, I was thinking about this book.
Yes, that's such a great book. I've read that. Yeah.
We were chatting a little bit about reading challenges earlier too, and I will say that is how I discovered these two authors, was through reading challenges. Yes. And basically, I will read anything by Neil, anything at all, and love it. And it's partly because of the humor. I actually consider this a comfort read because I find it laugh out loud funny.
Oh my goodness. Yes. You get those two together. They're so funny.
That led me into other reads like, Stardust and American Gods, which, my goodness, American Gods, what a beautifully crafted novel.
I love Stardust. Stardust is gorgeous.
Yeah. And the Graveyard Book. But basically, I feel like anything by him is a comfort read. There's just something, it's their children's tales, but they are so much more than that in the way that they are told. Yeah.
I remember reading that one of his main influences, particularly in Stardust, and when you read it knowing this, you're like, oh, I can see it, was he read a lot of Victorian stories, particularly like Victorian interpretations of fairy tales. And I went, oh, I can totally see that. But it makes it more, it might be technically for children or might be young adult, depending on how it's classed in the library. But they're incredibly appealing for adults. And he never talks down to his audience. It's always, I think it has one of the few authors that has a really wide age appeal. Even though the intended audience might be young adult, but adults might like it, older children might like it, and those stories stick with you. And same with Terry Pratchett. I mean, although he is just he was a very, very funny writer, and then the two of them got together and made that deliciously funny book. Have you read Neil's short stories?
No, I don't think I have.
There's Fragile Things. That's one collection. I remember there was a short story that he did. The first one that I had read of his is called Snow Glass Apples, which has won several awards, if I recall correctly. And all I will say is that it's a very original take on the fairy tale of Snow White, but told from a different perspective. It's from a different perspective, and it's good. It sat with me, and it just kind of stuck with me after I read it. And I went, wow, that is a storyteller. that is a very well crafted short story, and it was so good. I've reread it several times, and each time I reread it, I get something else out of that story. It's so well written.
I'll have to look it up. It sounds like our comfort reads run quite the spectrum of interest.
Yes, but that's the fun thing about comfort reads, is that a comfort read will vary widely between each person, between each reader, according to your mood, what kind of genres your tastes run to anyway, and then what you're actually kind of needing in your books, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of the fun with books, is that you can customize it and you can play with it and you can read according to your mood. It's not a one size fits all in that respect. It's not just a prescription. You can try different things and you can experiment, like what you did with reading challenges. You've experimented and tried new things. So that's one of the reasons why I love books so much, is that you can do so many things with them, and each time it's a different reading, it's a different learning experience, and it's so much fun.
Well, it's really nice to chat with you about this today.
It is. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation, and for all those who watch this, if you have any, remember to check out your local library, and maybe if you're curious, check out a reading challenge. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right. That concludes part 2 of my discussion with Stephanie about comfort reads. Thanks for joining us for All Booked, a look at reading with the Georgetown Public Library. I'm Alyssa Naley. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the library soon. Bye.